Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Breakfast Club number 28. Today is a really, really exciting day because as you can see, we are, well, as you may see or may suspect, we are coming to you for the first time on this show from the Academy's scientific collections. Ooh, Chrissy, good view. And with us today is our Geology Collections Manager, Chrissy Garcia. Hi, Chrissy. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today.
Yeah, and you struggled through some really annoying internet stuff, which we really appreciate. Because, you know, scientific collections are precious, and that means in our case that they are surrounded in basically a vault of concrete.
That's right.
So, yeah, thanks for getting it done. Yeah, so today is really special because Chrissy is basically going to give us a virtual tour of the geology collections by showing off kind of a lineup of really, really cool specimens. And I'll let you say more. I know you're going to talk more about scientific collections themselves. But I'll just say I'm so excited to bring people into them because they're an incredible resource that are driving research all over the world. And they're really, really difficult to show off because they have to be climate controlled and protected and because they're so incredibly vast. So this is a real treat. Chrissy, I wanted to start by asking, were you always just kind of from childhood fascinated by geology and fossils, or did you grow into that?
Oh, I don't know. That's one of the questions that I always get on a collections tour, Laurel, is like, how did you end up in this job or in this field?
Yeah.
And for me, I think I always had an innate curiosity. I grew up in Southeast Florida, so walking the beach with my grandmother, collecting shells and shark's teeth. There used to be lots of shark's teeth on the beach in Florida back then. So I was always fascinated by geology. She was always fascinated by it as well. But I didn't know that I was a geologist until I was probably 2 years into college. I took a marine science class for fun, and the professor was a geologist, but he worked in both the fossil and the recent. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in these collections too. And he took one look at me and he was like, "You're a marine geologist." He was right.
That's awesome.
So, yeah. And then I came out here to San Francisco from Florida to work on a summer project on a very small subset of our collection, even though the subset I'm mentioning is huge.
Right.
And I never left.
And we're so glad. I'm so glad.
Me too. So thank you, Cal Academy, for having me.
Yeah. How long have you been at the Academy, actually?
I came here in 2014.
Okay, awesome. All right, cool. Well, I want people to know that we are also going to do this kind of even more casually than we usually do. So we're just going to make this a conversation, and I'm going to hang out the whole time and ask your questions kind of as you ask them. And yeah, Chrissy, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, okay. So thank you for the introduction, Laurel. My name is Chrissy Garcia. I manage the geology collections here at the California Academy of Sciences. Laurel, if you just want to pop my slide up really quickly. So for those of you who have never been here to the Academy, this is our beautiful, modern, state-of-the-art building in Golden Gate Park. It's full of glass and concrete and big, bright windows, which is a wonderful experience if you're on the public floor, but it's almost the opposite conditions that we need for maintaining collections. So where I'm standing right now probably looks a lot different from this light, airy picture that you see on the screen. I am, as Laurel said, basically in a concrete bunker, 2 floors beneath this building on the screen here, in a room that is climate controlled. So we control for temperature, humidity, and we have no natural light coming into this room. And those are the conditions that we need to preserve the specimens that we have for as long as is possible. So even though this is our building now here in Golden Gate Park, this building is about 11 years old now. And the Academy has been around since 1853. And so at the onset of the Academy, one of the driving motivations behind the work was understanding and documenting California's resources. And California has rich geologic resources, both in terms of fossils and minerals. The gold rush sort of birthed the ability for us to be able to have institutions like this out on the West Coast. So we were the first natural history museum west of the Mississippi. So we've got a really long history in terms of the United States, and we've got rich geologic collections here. So the mission of the Academy is to explore, explain, and sustain life. And one of the main ways that we are doing that is by caring for these collections that we have. And there are an estimated 46 million specimens here at the Academy across a multitude of disciplines. So we have anthropology collections, botany, entomology, herpetology, ichthyology, invertebrate zoology and geology, ornithology and mammalogy, microbiology collections. We have cryo collections, and we also have our library and our archives. So of these roughly 46 million specimens, we estimate that there are about 10 million specimens in the geology collections. So our collections are pretty broad, and a lot of other institutions of our size, the geologic collections might be split out a little bit. You'd have maybe specialists who were working with vertebrates, invertebrates, microfossils, which we won't go too much into today. These are a part of our geologic collections, but those might be split out at other institutions. And then we also have a rich mineral collection, meteorites. It's a super, super broad overview of geology as a discipline here, right here in these collections, which for me is incredibly fun. I'm never going to know everything about all of the wonderful specimens that we have here, but it's also intimidating. So I'm sure there are experts out there. You're going to know more than I do on a lot of these things. So again, like my job is to manage these collections. So I manage them for their longevity, but also for their current access. So researchers are in here actively using the collections within our institution, so our own curators, and then also researchers outside of our institution. And then we also have many, many of our collections online. So the digital data that we extract from each of these specimens, we put online in what are called large data aggregators, and those are shared with the whole community. And then of course, we have our tiny little sliver of specimens that we are able to display on our public floor and share with the public. So for me, being a collections manager, it's a lot of fun, non-COVID times, to have people here visiting the collections and to also give collections tours to our visitors and even to our staff who may not work in the research division. So that kind of helps them understand, what it is that we're doing here. So I miss doing that, and I'm so grateful that you all are here with me today in the collections. I get to show some of them off. So what I have on my screen here, this is a fun sort of illustration of The Ages of Rock by Ray Troll. And this, I just want you to notice that this is essentially a geologic timescale, but there is a lot of artists' leeway here. If you notice at the very bottom, the Proterozoic and the Archean, it's a huge chunk of time to squeeze down into this little teeny tiny sliver. And then you see at the top the Cenozoic, which by all intents and purposes, 66 million years out of 4.6 billion years is a very small slice of the time scale. So the scale is not to scale, if you will, but it is a good illustration of how our collections are sort of represented. So it's more common to get fossils that are younger than are older. That might make sense to some people, but we do have fossils in our collections here at the Academy that date all the way back to Precambrian. So these major divisions here are based on basically major faunal turnovers. So there are more mass extinctions in here, but at the end of each major division, there is typically a significant extinction event, and you can really see that in the specimens here. So I'm just going to jump to
Chrissy. We have so many people who are so excited that we're finally talking about geology. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I'm so thrilled. Seriously, I get to geek out a little bit. But so on the screen here, there is an artist rendering of a Precambrian ocean world. Lots of volcanoes going off. Atmospheric conditions not conducive to life as we know it. So very little free oxygen in the atmosphere. But we have these these microbial communities called stromatolites, and those still exist today. So the picture of Shark Bay, Western Australia, that's a recent picture. And so these are some of like the coolest. I think they're just so cool. So basically what happens here is you've got these layers of these microbial mats that get laid down, and then sediment basically precipitates or falls on top of them, and there's some carbonate production happening in there too. And then the bacteria, the cyanobacteria, comes up above the layer of sediment again because it wants to photosynthesize. It needs the light. And so it goes up, more sediment goes on top, the cyanobacteria comes up, more sediment on top, over and over and over again into these fantastic layers. And these cyanobacteria, the work that they did for 85% of Earth's history, basically gave us the oxygen that we have today. It helped usher in the world as we know it. So we owe a lot to these microbes, really. Bacteria. Thanks, bacteria. And so then we usher in the Paleozoic. And so there's some classic fossils that I'm sure you all have heard lots about. Trilobites, right? Everybody, or most of us who are geology geeks or fossil geeks, love trilobites. And trilobites were incredibly diverse. There were over 20,000 species. They had these cool segmented exoskeletons, which allowed them to really kind of change and adapt. And if you see me pop out of the window, it's because I'm grabbing fossils. So
wait, I'm gonna make you larger so we can watch this process.
Yeah. So Laurel, if you go back to the picture for just a second, I just want to point out some of the critters here. So we've got echinoids, we've got Euriptards, which are sometimes referred to as sea scorpions. We even have nautiloids and trilobites, of course. So I'm going to grab some of those so you all can see.
Okay. And it's amazing to think about that much like species diversity with it. Like when people think about trilobites, I think we just think about one kind of trilobite.
Yeah, no, there's so many different forms. So here is...
Oh, hang on. I was trying to make you bigger, but I'm going to get rid of me for a second.
So the light's a little low, a little dim, but here is a fossil of a sea scorpion. This is from New York. And you can see the paddles at the top, and then this sort of scorpion-like tail. So it makes sense why they were called sea scorpions. And this is a little one.
How big did they get, Chrissy?
Oh, I don't know that off the top of my head. So what I've heard over 6 feet.
Wow, cool.
Yeah.
They're weirdly charismatic. Like that was a very cute little friend.
Yeah. So here is another one that's quite heavy. Let's see if I can turn it around. You can really see the paddles here. Again, another little one. I can't imagine seeing one of these 6 feet long. Be a terrifying marine arthropod. And then again, can you see the tail at the end? And you might be able to see some of the outlines of the segmented body.
And do you know how did they move along the floor in the same way trilobites did, or how would they have used those paddles?
So from what I understand about trilobites is that trilobites had a variety of mechanisms. Euriptards, I think, did a lot more swimming.
Okay.
I don't think they were burrowers in the same way that some trilobites were.
Okay. Someone just asked how much that weighs. Do you happen to know? That chunk of rock?
I have a 3-year-old who weighs probably about 28 pounds. I would say that was about 15 pounds.
Okay. Well done.
15, 18? I don't know. I'm guessing.
Well done. John would like to know whether we have any from the Bay Area.
Oh, no, we don't have any Euripterids here from the Bay Area. Nope.
Okay. And then
That's
someone else.
Question, though.
It is. And someone else asked, basically with your fossils, with a lot of fossils that are fairly heavy, do you have to do any structural reinforcement, or how do you handle those in the collection space?
That's a great question. So since you're here and since we're like doing really off the cuff informal here,
Yeah.
I'm going to take you
Okay.
on a little bit of a walk. Not far, just a smidge. Do you see behind me here?
Oh, cool. Yeah.
This is a Brontorithidae skull. It's incredibly heavy. We have fossil whale material in our collections here too. Laurel, I don't know if you're still on.
Yep, I am. I just wanted people to be able to see.
So yeah, we do have to do reinforcement. We have to think really long and hard about how we store a lot of this material. So you can imagine like a large vertebrate that is not a fossil would be quite heavy, or whale bones, which actually are not that heavy. But when you start to talk about, well, they're heavy and they're still heavy, but they're
relative to a 3-year-old.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. But if you're a fossil, your original bone material has been replaced by another material, and you've turned to rock basically. Mm-hmm. So it's super heavy. It's super heavy, and so we have like these big pallet racks that we use for some of the bigger, heavier pieces. We do have to reinforce drawers at times. We've got to think about how we strap things down. Mm-hmm. So we've got quite a few mammoth tusks, and I'll talk a little bit more about mammoths. So no, I don't have any California Euriptards, but we have lots of Bay Area Pleistocene megafauna, which the mammoths are one of them. So we've got these tusks, and so we've got to really think hard about how those are cared for, and they're sort of cradled and strapped into these big, oversized pallet racks. But yeah, it's a great question. We've got to think about how we store things, and we got to think about how we transport things. We're a small crew, mm-hmm. So when we try to move things, we're borrowing people from other departments.
Yeah, and somebody asked some of the measures that you mentioned specific to the tusk. Is that because of earthquakes? Are those sort of the primary concern?
For us here in the Bay Area and for California, absolutely. That's a big concern. Mm-hmm. It's something that we always have to be mindful of. And so, yeah, that's definitely part of it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure these specimens are stable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's a trilobite. I'm going to show you guys some trilobites.
Okay, I'm going to remove myself so that you can take the full screen.
So here is one of our forms of trilobite, Phacops, and you can see the eye sockets up here. And again, that segmented body. And these things were all over the ocean floors. Sometimes it freaks me out to think about them like crawling everywhere, burrowing beneath the mud. If you've ever seen trilobite trackways, you get an idea of the scale. This is a cool one. So it has sort of this protruding rostrum here. And you might have a hard time seeing it, but there's some relief here. It's almost like an ornamentation, like a sail almost on its back. And these were probably used for attracting mates. But you can see some of the differences here in the ornamentation of this trilobite versus the one that I just showed you.
And Chrissy, we pretty
big too. Go ahead.
Yeah. We got some questions about how old that particular specimen is.
Okay. So this one right here is Devonian. Most of these are Devonian.
These are beautiful fossils. They're really extraordinary.
So 400 to 360 million years old.
Amazing.
And then I'll show you some cute little ones too.
Oh, Lucy would like to know if we have any saber-toothed tigers.
Oh, don't we, Lucy?
Do we ever? And what is this? I'm sorry. Oh, let me remove myself.
This is another little trilobite, so you just kind of get an idea of the size. And so one defense mechanism that they had was to actually curl up into a ball. and avoid predators.
That's extraordinary. They're honestly, like, this isn't very scientific, but they were so cute too.
They were cute. That's cool. You can say that. So here's another one with another different kind of shape. Bat wings, if you will. That's a non-scientific term.
And Chrissy, do you know offhand what the oldest specimen in the collection is? That's a question from Jim.
I love that question. It's probably one of the stromatolites.
And tell us what that is for.
Yeah, so the stromatolite are those bacterial mounds that I was talking about.
Oh, okay.
But then we also have this piece of banded iron formation from Western Australia that's been aged at about 3.4 billion years old.
Billion?
So that, wow. Yes. And so that's a pretty cool, pretty special specimen. And it's also like, it's pretty hardy, so we'll even let people touch it sometimes.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So you get to touch a piece of 3.4 billion year old rock.
Yeah, that's as close to deep time as we can get our heads wrapped around, probably, like as a human being standing somewhere.
But so again, like going back to just the range of disciplines that the geology collections cover, because we have meteorites in our collection.
Oh, right.
We have material that's even older than that.
Yeah.
Probably a little over 4.5 billion, some of the pieces of meteorite that we have. The Gibeon and maybe the, the name is escaping me right now, which one I want to say. Cielo del Campo. So that one's pretty old. Here, I'm going to show you my favorite trilobite, and then I'll move on from trilobites and show you some other.
Great. And as you're showing it, I was just going to say there's some interest in just having you point out the different parts of the trilobite again.
Yeah. This one is sort of easy to see here. So this is, I'm going to show you the side profile. So somebody painstakingly chiseled that out of this soft, silty rock. This is like its nose, if you will, but it probably wouldn't have used it the same way that we would have. And then the body, I'll try to see if you can, has these segments. And that's the gist of it. But this is the exoskeleton of the animal, right? It's not the animal itself. And so that's something that we like to point out as well, is that it isn't easy to become a fossil.
Right.
Okay? So there's a lot of things that have to happen. You have to have hard parts that can solidify. You have to be buried relatively quickly so scavengers don't take you apart, and weathering processes don't break down your hard parts. And then you have to not undergo significant tectonic activity. So why we don't see a lot of older material, there's been a lot of plates moving and colliding, mountain building, all of these processes have super high heat, high pressure involved, and that tends to destroy fossils. So the fossil record certainly isn't perfect, but it is a fantastic window into the past and possibly a window into the future as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later after we're done showing some things off.
Yeah, and Lester, that will apply to the question that you just asked. We had a couple people here ask, including John, how you actually establish the age of a fossil.
That's a great question. And the answer has changed over time. Radiometric dating is one way that we've really been able to refine and define the ages. So you look at the isotopes that are present and the half-life of an isotope, and you can get an age. But before we had a lot of those technologies, if you will, there's some basic laws, Steno's laws of geology, that were proposed and accepted and studied by many. And the first law is the law of superposition. So basically it means that whatever's underneath is older than whatever's on top. and so on and so forth. And then that law, the second law, is that everything originally was deposited horizontally. So then we have uplift and folding and some changing of things, and sometimes you get rock extruding through other layers. So based on those principles, and also based on the modern world, like what we see in the modern world, how long does it take for sediment to accumulate in the bottom of a lake?
Right.
How long do these processes take? So we're often looking at the present to infer information about the past, and that's one way. But now that we have the technologies to actually date these things, that's a major way.
Yeah, cool.
It's done.
I want to.
So correlation. So just one more thing. So correlation too. So another reason that I love fossils, before the theory of plate tectonics could really be proved via like GPS, wow, we actually see these plates moving.
Yeah.
You're looking at fossils across ocean basins. So if you have an idea of the relative age of a unit in one place, and if there are index fossils, so fossils that are only characteristic of this certain period of time, and you find them elsewhere in the world, you sort of use that to correlate between units. Yes.
Yeah. Oh no, I was just gonna say, if you need to move us along, feel free. There's lots of good questions coming in, so I'm just gonna throw them at you.
Throw them at me.
Okay, so Jim, age 4, would like to know what the best place close to the Bay Area is to find fossils.
Oh. Go out to your beaches and go take a look.
Yeah.
There's lots of fossil exposures and sea cliffs around our area. You can find whale fossil. You can't take them though. I have to say that. You have to have the proper permits to take fossils, but you can certainly take pictures of them and go and bring your scale bar out there so you get an idea of what the scale is and document all of that. But yeah, I think beaches are for me, one of the most enjoyable places locally that you can easily get to, that you're allowed to be at.
Yeah.
See lots of cool fossils.
Yeah, and that's true for people around the Great Lakes too, right? Like there's incredible, you don't have to be on a coast to just see some like really, just suddenly find. I remember finding something, I think near Lake Michigan, that Peter Rupner, our geology curator, looked at and was like, oh yeah, that's such and such, million years old or whatever. And it was just stunning because it was.
And he's like, oh, whatever.
Yeah.
Such and such million years old.
Yeah.
No biggie. Yeah, that's super cool and very true. Yes, totally true.
Yeah.
Let's see. So, all right, here. So this is a type of coral.
I'm going to make these big again.
This is a rugose coral. And this was the dominant type of coral in the oceans. And this is from Shasta, actually, California. So before we had the scleractinians that we know and love today, these big rugose reefs would have dominated. And you can see a little bit of that in that picture that I showed you. But then something else I just want to show you because I think it's super cool and we still...
We'll put that picture back up briefly.
Yeah, they still exist to a degree today. So in the background there, that sort of shadowy, there's not a good example in this picture, but these are crinoids. And our curator of echinoderms, Rich Moy, is an expert in these. And these are just sometimes called sea lilies. They're just super cool. They've got these long stalks, and you find bits of their stalks in abundance in some of these fossil layers, and then you've got these wavy bits at the top, collecting all kinds of good stuff out of the water.
I think those stalk segments are largely what people find around the Great Lakes. That's what I had found too. They're really cool.
That's what you found?
Mm-hmm.
That's super cool.
Yeah. Oh, and I was going to say, Rudyard had a really good point about fossils. So you can't take them, but you can post them to Inaturalist, which is a really, you can use it on desktop, but it's also just a really handy app. And it collects observations from all over the world. You don't have to be a scientist to use it. And but then scientists and researchers can actually piece together that big data to build a bigger picture of life on Earth. And it's really cool.
Yeah, thanks so much for pointing that out. That's such a good point. So you can collect biological data with your smartphone by using iNaturalist, but you can also collect ancient biological data, so the fossil information as well. And that all of that information helps piece together the picture, the puzzle.
Yeah. And Melissa asked if there were any resources that would help identify fossils they found. And actually, if you post stuff to Inaturalist, the rest of the community, which includes a lot of experts, will help you to identify those, which is a really cool feature.
Yeah.
Oh, people are really loving this. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Inaturalist. So let's see. Do I have anything else I want to show you from here? I think
let's move into the next time period. So at the end of this time period here, the Paleozoic, we have the largest mass extinction in Earth's history. So 90% of marine life goes kaput, 70% of plants, which, by the way, we have ferns and cycads, and I didn't want to go into all that because I know Dr. Natalie Nagalingam has talked to you all a couple of times about ferns and cycads, which she studies, and she's one of the best in the field at that. So I just wanted to point that out. So end of the Paleozoic, and then we're moving into the Mesozoic, which is often known as the age of dinosaurs, right? But we don't have dinosaurs really here in California. We don't have dinosaur fossils. So if you remember at the beginning, I was talking about the founding of the Academy and the desire to understand California's resources. So because we don't have dinosaurs in California, we don't have lots of dinosaur fossils here at the Academy. We're very rich in California material here, although we do have collections that are worldwide in scope. However, marine reptiles, we got them to a degree. Our friends over at UC Berkeley at the UCMP in their vertebrate paleontology section, they have quite a collection as well. And there were some prominent collectors here at the end, late 1800s, early 1900s. Ammonites, that's one that we have lots of, though. Our former curator of geology was an ammonite specialist, and he and his colleagues, one of whom is still working and collecting at the ripe age of 93 or 94 now.
Yeah.
He's got 70 years of collecting ammonites from California, mostly Northern California, under his belt, and most of those collections are here at the Academy. So we've got a really rich record here, and I'm going to show you some of these beasties. Is everyone familiar with the ammonites? I mean, as far as like marine things go during this time period, they're one of the more well-recognized critters.
You could probably, if you described kind of generally what they look, or as soon as people see one, they'll be like, oh, I do know, yeah. You may not know, but when you see the shape.
So I'm going to bring you over to this cabinet because the things that are in it are a bit fragile, and you'll see why.
And this is a general question, but Calvin would like to know what the rarest fossil in your collection is.
Oh, that is a great question that I haven't been asked before.
Really? People love superlatives. I'm surprised. Okay, but let's look at these ammonites. Oh my God. Okay, I'm going to make you a large again.
Okay, do you see this here? This is an ammonite. Its most closely related living relative is the Nautilus. So these are cephalopods, and the animal itself would have lived in the very last chamber. So this is a series of chambers in this spiral, one growing after the other. Here's another in here. And I'll pull out some smaller ones so you can really kind of dig in and look at them. But these dominated the oceans during the time of the dinosaurs, and they are incredibly diverse. So kind of similar to trilobites in the way that they diversified. They're excellent index fossils because of that. They're found all over the world. Here's one, and I'm going to hold it in its proper anatomical position. But the animal would start here and grow. As it grew, it would build chamber after chamber after chamber, and the animal would live in the last chamber. So here you'd have a squid-like protrusion, and I will show you a fun model that we have from a really old exhibit. My predecessor saved everything. Blessing and a curse.
But it's the nature of the collections manager. So this was from an old exhibit that some of you may remember if you've been
around the Academy for a long time. This is from our Life Through Time exhibit. And so here's that little spiral shell, and here is the squid-like cephalopod that would have lived in the very last chamber here. So you can see the eyeball there.
That's so incredible. There's an interesting question here from Allison. I don't know if you know the answer, but she's curious why they would bother to drag the old chambers along with them.
That is a wonderful question.
Mm-hmm.
So the chambers would be filled with gases or fluids,
and that's how they swam. So there's what's called a siphonal tube that runs down the very center, and that's where they can exchange those fluids or those gases. So that allows them to dive, to move through the water column.
And you can see Nautilus doing that today if you watch them kind of shift in the water column.
Exactly. And if you see, and I'm sorry that I don't have one with me right now, but if you ever look at a cross section of a Nautilus, let me see if I can, yeah, you'll see all of those chambers. And the last chamber is the biggest one, because that's where the animal is kind of hanging out.
it's going to make space for itself. But in between, so this is something that's really cool.
In between the chambers, there's a wall separating them. And can you see the detail here?
Yeah, I'm going to remove myself again. It's amazing, though.
These are called suture lines. These really ornate patterns in this ammonite. So this is also an ammonite, but it's a different form. The ones that I showed you that were super ornate, that had the spikes coming off of them, they were what's called an open coil. This is closed, but they all had these patterned walls that separated each of the chambers. And so it's kind of wild to think that there's a chamber that's fit in between there. But throughout time, throughout the Mesozoic, these lines, these patterns, essentially the structure of the walls between each chamber, they became more and more complex. And there's a bit of an ongoing debate about why exactly that is. A lot of people believe that the more ornate that structure, the more complicated that structure, the more resistance to crushing, either from the crushing jaws of predators or from just the sheer pressure of the water that they were living in. So that maybe if they were stronger, they could go deeper hunting for food or whatever. And then there's others who think that it might have more to do with the ease in which they could move gases and fluids through the chambers to also help them with swimming. But this is one of the reasons. So these amazing patterns are one of the reasons that we're able to so distinctly see the rate and complexity of their evolution, and everything during this time period, the Mesozoic, especially in the marine realm, is just blowing up. Things are getting like super wild, ornate spikes. The jaws are getting bigger and crushier, and the teeth are scarier. I'm going to show you a cast. It's not a real possible. I'll show you a cast of one of the marine reptiles here. But the phenomena of that complexity through that time is called the Mesozoic Marine Revolution, the MMR. Basically, there's a phenomena coined by Dr. Gary Vermeer, who's at UC Davis, and said it was an evolutionary arms race. And so here is a cast of one of our large marine reptiles. I mean, these teeth are just out of this world. And so if you're an ammonite and you're being preyed on by this guy because you're so tasty, you might want to get a little bit stronger. Or you might want to grow some spikes so that it's not as easy to just chomp on you and eat you.
I'm doing both. What was that called, Chrissy?
This one is, let's see. Well, it was called Calawaeosaurus, but I think that name has been updated.
Okay, and we have questions from people who want to know if they're related to crocodiles.
Ah. No, I don't think that specifically was related to crocodiles. So crocodiles have been around for a really long time. Yeah. I'm not 100% sure on that one.
We can look it up. We can get back
I'll
to
look
you.
it up and let you know. I want to say no. And crocodiles are their own thing with their own very long, rich record.
Right.
But I'll look that up. So here is another little ammonite. And you might be able to see here, there's some, puncture holes in the shell. So this is one of my favorite things to show people. It goes through the other side. Can you see these little holes here? So this is evidence of being bitten. This animal likely died from the attack. So here you see there's some actual shell bit left, but it's mostly mud filled in, creating most of the support of the fossil. And these holes are filled with mud, which tells me that they didn't heal. So there are instances where you can see the shell regrowing over an ammonite, and this is true also with marine clams and snails. They can recover from predator attacks. This one, not so much. So one of the cool things about working with fossils, and one of the most exciting things for me about what some of our researchers here do, is that they are building these connections from the fossil record with animals that don't exist anymore, plants and animals that aren't around anymore, and other organisms too. And one way that they do that is by, again, like looking at what we see today and looking at modern ancestors of some of these animals and inferring what their behaviors were. But the other is like looking at evidence like this. So how do we know that marine reptiles ate ammonites? Well, we find marine reptile teeth lodged in the shells of some of these, or we find these bite marks, or you find gut contents, or you look and study coprolites, which is fossil poop, which, believe it or not, can be very beautiful. Yeah. And it doesn't smell anymore, so it's not as gross as it sounds. So there are things like that I think are particularly cool. Maybe I'm being a little nerdy on that one.
No, I think anything that shows, when you can see the actual interactions of individual animals from that long ago, it's just incredible.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the best way to, how do you know what things we're doing?
Right.
So that goes back to like being a fossil, becoming a fossil. So you got to have hard parts, and then there are different types of fossils too. So to be a body fossil, you have to have hard parts to have any sort of remnant of your body left behind. In most cases, there is an exception, and I'll show you some of those. But then there are also trace fossils. So trace fossils are just evidence that you were there. So it could be your burrow or your trackways from the trilobites that we were talking about. So how do we know that trilobites did that? Well, we find their trackways, or we find their molted exoskeletons in masses and trackways leading up to those. So or nests. Or dinosaur footprints, like how fast were they? Well, you look at the spread between where we find their footprints and knowing how large their bodies were. So it's just all these little lines of evidence.
Yeah.
My colleagues who was a postdoc here, and I'll talk a little bit about her work in a minute, she likes to say that she gets to be a deep time CSI. So
totally. Yeah, there's so much evidence there, so much information. What are the, we had some questions earlier, actually, two folks asked what the temperature is in the collection space.
Ooh, I love these questions. We have to hit a compromise in these rooms. Certain materials like different conditions, but there's usually a good compromise in there somewhere. And so we like to say 65 degrees Fahrenheit. So we want the temperature to be constant, and we want it to be at or very near 65.
Mm-hmm.
And we want humidity to be at 50% or slightly lower for most things. Some things that's not true. But one of the main bits of that equation is that there aren't too many swings. So you don't want to have large swings.
Right.
So if you think about what heat or moisture does, especially when it swings back and forth, you've got expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction. Not good.
Right.
For rocks.
Right.
So there is a phenomena in the geologic record called Lagerstat. It's a German word.
Yep.
Basically means like storage place or storage locker. And these are really unique environments, usually like low oxygen environments, high rates of sedimentation, and they have excellent preservation. So here is something from the same time period. So these are little worm tracks. So we have a trace fossil here. And this is evidence that this animal was soft-bodied, that we would not find a body fossil for, was present. So again, take information like this and plug it all in, and that's our ancient food web. So this is a really cool piece. So this is Jurassic in age, and this is a bit of a jellyfish. And these are from the Solnhofen, Lagerstadt in Germany. It's one of the very famous fossil localities. And just the preservation is just incredible. We do have Lagerstats in the US. Let's see if I can show you here. So the Green River Formation in Wyoming, and I'm jumping ahead to another time period, but that is one of the more exceptional ones. And I am going to show you this big slab. So we have a fish at the top, and then that's a stingray, folks. And you can see the outline, and these are the kinds of formations, these Lagerstats are where we see the evidence of bird feathers, the outlines of feathers, and all of these other things that we might not have preserved so well. So
it's incredible.
You actually get the bones of the fish, and then you kind of get this carbonized, in some cases, impression, and then all of the mold and cast type fossils. So these are super cool and incredibly important for helping scientists understand what existed.
And can you, we got a question from someone who just missed. Can you explain again what creates a Lagerstat, what the ideal conditions are for a deposit like that?
Yeah, so you need quick burial usually, and then low oxygen conditions are one characteristic of a lot of Lagerstats, and what that essentially does is eliminates your scavengers or your aerobic breaking down of organic material. You guys see that? Got a little fish.
That's incredible. And is there just one in the US?
No, I think there's a couple more. There's a couple more in the US, but Green River is a very famous one. And then also the La Brea tar pits are also sometimes referred to as a Lagerstat. So that's tar. So that's a really unique situation where you've got this bubbling tar coming up, animals falling in, and I'm just going to go ahead onto my next slide here, and this is a good way to just jump right in to our next time period. So dinosaurs wiped out, almost 3/4 of the ocean life wiped out at the end of the Mesozoic, and then we issue in the Cenozoic. These animals that are here on the screen, this is sort of North American megafauna. This is the very end of the last ice age, which ended about 10,000 years ago, 11,000 years ago. the marine communities that we see in the Cenozoic, this is sort of the birth of our modern oceans. We get the whales and the dolphins, and it's starting to move from land into the sea. And then, of course, we still have our fish who come through, lots of critters that make it through the extinction. But then we'll just jump straight into the Ice Age here and talk about this Lagerstat of the La Brea tar pit. So if you were here with me, another thing I like to do when people come visit the collection is I open this cabinet and I tell everybody to take a big whiff.
It's going to get you.
Okay. This is a little bit tricky to see. So if you were here with me, you'd be smelling this tar smell special. And so what we have here is a fossil horse skull. So this is the top of the horse. There's the skull. And its jaw is underneath here. I will pick this up so you guys can get a better look. And so these tar pits are also excellent preservation. So you can imagine it just basically entombs whatever falls into it. Nothing can really go in after it to eat it, which is probably why we find so many birds and animals and even human remains in these tar pits, because they got stuck trying to get something else out that was already trapped. Thought it was going to be an easy meal, and ended to not even be a last meal. And then someone asked earlier about saber-toothed cat. Here is Kitty. This is our Smilodon fossil. It's a nearly complete fossil. I apologize for the glare here, but I'm just going to try to get you around it. And there have been a lot of these found in the La Brea tar pits. So those are some of our wonderful Ice Age megafauna.
So good. Also, I love this question from Arturo. He's curious how fossil collections are organized or classified by geological era or by the taxonomic relationship.
Yeah, that's another great question. Are you a museum person? That is a museum person. That's a museum person question. Our recent biological collections are largely organized taxonomically. So the room that I'm in right now I share with invertebrate zoology with their dry collections, and there's a lot of good reason for that. I was just talking about the Cenozoic and the rise of modern oceans. So a lot of what we see today, there's a fossil record for, so folks who are working in those groups often look at some of the fossil specimens. The geology collections, our collections, are arranged by time chunks, and then somewhat geographically from there. And then from there, we try to refine it further by stratigraphic units, so that's more refined age. And sometimes, depending on how much material we have, how many specimens we have, sometimes that becomes taxonomic as well. So there's sort of grades. So the first is we have our large chunks of time. So we have a Paleozoic section, a Mesozoic section, and a Cenozoic section. And then we're arranged somewhat by location from there, and then further by time within there. And then sometimes there's a systematic set within that too. It's confusing, right? And it's not always clean. So what we try to do is, again, like we try to digitally capture this information. So everything has a drawer number. So if you're a researcher who says, I just want to see all the crabs, I don't care about anything else, I just want to see the crabs, I don't care how old they are, whatever, I should be able to go into my database and look for what you're looking for, and it should be able to tell me everywhere in the collection that exists. That's no small feat with a collection this large, and it's still a work in progress. But if you're somebody who is looking at the ecology of an area, you can go right into that area in the collection and see everything that there is that we have from that place in time.
Yeah. Maureen, sorry, I was also curious. Do you happen to know how old the human remains were that you referenced being found in the tar pits?
Probably, probably around 10,000. They could have been older.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to, so the best information that you're going to find on that is just go to the La Brea Tar Pits website.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got a running list of everything that's been found in those tar pits, all kinds of good information there, really good information there.
I'll squeeze in one more from Jerome here, just quickly.
Yeah.
I understand some geological specimens may be radioactive. How do you handle those safely?
Well, number one, handle them infrequently. Okay. Number two, we want to try to keep the things, first of all, things that are extremely radioactive, we deaccessioned quite a bit of material not too long ago of some mineral specimens that were highly, highly radioactive. And those went to a special lab over at Berkeley where there are researchers actually working on that material. So it made the most sense. So those specimens still exist. They're just in a place where they're actually being actively used and cared for, which wasn't happening here. And it wasn't a huge amount of material. But the things that we do have that we do keep, if something is extremely radioactive, we want to keep it in an enclosed space. All of our cabinetry is labeled, so you'll be warned way before you head down an aisle that, hey, there's potential danger here. That's another reason why just not everybody and their brother gets access to the collections, because there are certainly hazards within our collections. Geology has its own unique hazards, but there are other collections like the mammal collections, and the way that some of the skins have been prepped, those can be highly toxic. So yeah, sometimes it's a case-by-case basis. A lot of it is just leave it alone unless you have an actual real use for it. And if you have an actual real use for it, you probably know, you should know what you're doing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Ooh.
One last fun Ice Age Bay Area. This is a Mammoth Molar. Pretty big molar. So this is the bottom of the tooth that would be used for grinding grasses. And then the rest of it is basically the root, even up in the gum line. And these animals had 6 sets of teeth. They're said to have just come through like a conveyor belt. But when you got through your last set of teeth, no more teeth. Kind of a problem.
That can we see that one more time? The size of it just like really, I think, makes you think about the animal in a whole different way. The root is incredible.
So hold it closer to me because I'm kind of giving you. And then here's the bottom of the tooth where you can see how there's ridges that'd be used for grinding. And so we like looking at teeth and coprolites and stomach contents. That's, putting your whole web together.
Yeah.
So mammoth and mastodon, like what was the difference there? And again, it goes to the teeth. Here's the mastodon tooth. Super fun. All right, so it kind of walked us through some time, but I just want to show everyone, Laurel, if you'll throw up the next slide, put the next slide up. Thank you. So this here is just a quick screenshot that I actually took last night from a website called the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, or GBIF. And what you're seeing here, all these points on the map, those are a fraction of the specimens that we have here in our collections at the Cal Academy. And they are from almost every collection here at the Academy. So this is, I think, about 1.5 million specimen occurrences, or basically snapshots of what existed where and when. And you can see that, all over the globe, there are some areas that we're particularly rich in, where you see the darker red. And so, yeah, you kind of see like the whole west coast of the U.S. going all the way down through Central America. Madagascar is a prominent spot, and that's a lot of Brian Fisher's work there and others. The Philippines, Australia, this is just kind of like a quick snapshot. So if you remember from the beginning, 46 million specimens, 1.5 million represented here digitally. There's about 2.5 million online, but not all of them have precise latitude, longitude coordinates, which is why they're not on this map here. But I just want to give everybody an idea, like, this is part of our job of getting this really important information out there and getting it in the hands of researchers and the public. And this is one way that we do this, and we're continuing to find ways to do this more accurately, quicker, so that researchers can use the information to really answer some of the most important questions that our society is facing right now. And so I'm going to skip over this one. So I'm just going to jump just really quickly just through a couple of projects that are happening here in the geology collections, because I just want to give you an idea, like, we have all this cool stuff, but what are we actually doing with it? And so one of our major projects, which is wrapping up now, is called the EPIC project. It's an NSF collaborative digitization TCN, and the aim is to make 1.6 million fossil Cenozoic marine animal records made publicly available. And the map that you see here, the map on the left-hand side, this is sort of just an illustration of what's currently available in the major literature databases for Washington, Oregon, and California, which is a focus of this project. And then we did a survey of the 9 institutions that are a part of this grant, just of the fossil localities that we have. And that's the map that you see on the right-hand side. So again, like the deeper colors, that's just more, that's more data, it's just more. And what it turns out to be is there's 23 times more locality representation in our collective collections than what's currently being served in the major literature databases right now. This is changing because throughout the course of this project, as we extract all of this digital information from these fabulous specimens and put it online, the map on the left should start to mirror the map on the right. But this is a really, really important project, and one that's near and dear to my heart, and one that we've been working on here at the Academy for a little over 4 years now. But then I also wanted to highlight some of the work of our curator, Peter Rupnarine, who I think will be joining you soon, so I won't go too much into it because he can tell you all about it. But what you're seeing here is a very simplified food web. I think this food web is from the Jurassic, but each of the little circles here represents a major group, and then all of the lines in between represent those interactions. So again, it's using all of these fossil collections, all of the data in the published literature, and basically recreating communities from that information and how energy flowed through communities. And then what Peter does is he runs models and he says, what happens when I take out this top predator? What happens when certain species are eliminated from the food chain, and how do those communities react, and do they collapse? And then he also looks at communities as they restructure after these mass extinction events. And he asks the question, well, how long does it take for them to recover? Why did they go extinct, and how do they recover? And I think we all know that has a lot of implications for what we're seeing today. So another thing that they use to draw some of these connections is body size. So here's this ammonite again, and this is my friend and colleague in the bottom right corner here, Dr. Ashley Deneen. She's now at the UCMP, and she's standing in front of this giant ammonite. I believe this is at the Museum of Natural History in Paris. But then you see the one all the way on the left, which is a couple of centimeters. So they use body size as well to determine like what could have eaten what. Like that teeny tiny ammonite couldn't have eaten a gastropod, but the giant one, who knows what that thing was eating. So they're using data like that, not only from our collections, but also from collections around the world. And so here is, if you think about that simplified food web that I just showed you, where each of those little circles had a little icon of what the species was and with the connections, this is the same thing here. So this is an Anisian food web. You can't even see the nodes here because there's so many of them. And then all of these lines, I call it the ethereal beach ball.
Yeah.
All of these lines are connections between these different species and how energy is flowing through that system. And so one of the questions is, well, if the fossil record is spotty, how accurate can it be? Can it give us a really good picture? And so the other bit of work that Rupnarayan and Deneen did here, and others who are in the lab and are working on these things, they looked at a modern Caribbean coral reef, and they looked at all of the plants, animals, the protists that existed there. So the foraminifera and the diatoms, which maybe if I'm not boring you all too much, you'll let me come back and talk about those.
Love it.
But so what they did was they looked at all of the critters that would not have preserved in the fossil record, and they took them out of this food web. So they're using fisheries data here, research data, all of the data that they can gather, specimen records from museums to build this modern Caribbean reef. And then they take out everything that wouldn't have fossilized. And it turns out that the structure of these food webs really didn't change that much. Yes, they lost species, but the same guilds were, even they lost guilds too, but there's still enough information here to really build an accurate picture. Basically, what we lost from the fossil record wasn't enough, did not change the outcome. Mm-hmm. And so this is just sort of a proof of concept that these fossil food webs are accurate and are really applicable, probably not to every question that we want to answer, but many of them. And it can give us a really good idea of what we really need to preserve and put our energies and efforts into. So one of the common sayings in geology is the law of uniformitarianism. It says, the present is the key to the past, and the past is the key to the future. And so we're looking at these changes and these things in the past. And again, if I could come back and talk about microfossils sometime, I'll talk about some other projects that we're working on that ask questions like, what happens to marine communities when temperature is raised 2 degrees Celsius? Well, how can we know? Well, guess what? I can go back in the fossil record during a time period where I know that that's what the temperature increases were based on shell chemistry and ice core records and all the rest, and ask those questions and look and see.
Yeah.
And get a better idea, and hopefully that'll help us do a better job at preserving our world that we need so desperately.
Yeah. Yeah. There's that outpouring of yeses for the idea of you coming back to talk more. So yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, I'm going to let you finish.
That's it. I was just going to say thank you to everyone. And if there's more questions, I'll love to answer them.
Yeah, we've kind
of gone over here on time, but
no worries. Also, do we want to call out Jean just because?
Yeah. So this is a picture of my predecessor, Dr. Jean DeMuth. She cared for these collections for about 45 years before she passed a couple years ago. She was a mineralogist. So she's standing here in front of one of her pride and joys. This is the Gems and Minerals Unearthed exhibit in one of our galleries here in the Academy. I can't wait for everyone to be able to come back and to check this out. And who knows, Laurel, maybe we'll do a session. Maybe I can do one of these where I'm standing in the gallery and I can take
my God, yes.
Tour of the gallery. Why not? Honor her and her legacy.
Let's do it. Yeah. Also, I like to remember that she was a huge fan of Comic Sans font, which I hated and loved at the same time, and also a queen of puns, of terrible puns that were great.
Yes.
But yeah,
so
she's
true.
Missed every day.
It's so funny, like the Comic Sans thing. I saw something the other day and I was like, oh, I found this note and Jeannie's typing. Yeah. She was always.
Yeah. I love, and it's amazing because we have these collections that last forever, and the people who care for them, like they also leave their mark in the same way, and how they curate them and care for them and what they leave behind. And that's one of the things I love about museums is just, people tend to stay a long time. I'm so glad too that the map of the world map that you showed, I've never actually seen that view before, and it was incredible to see. Yeah, I've never seen that before, and just to see it visualized in that way just makes you think about impact so differently. So yeah, it was incredible.
And you know, it's just a small fraction, and,
Right.
and it's why we're working really hard to digitize these collections and focusing on, you know, what we think is most important right now. Because what we use these collections for today, there will be a totally new use for them down the road. Just as, you know, the uses have changed since they were amassed.
Yeah.
So
there was a lot of interest too in the various kind of projects and resources you referenced. So I'll work with, viewers, I will work with Chrissy afterwards to get links to anything that we can share, and I'll drop them in the comment section. Okay, cool. So just a handful of odds and ends for folks. There were a lot of people who actually didn't understand why, or that there were radioactive specimens or fossils, and just would like to understand what makes them that way.
So, because there are radioactive minerals on Earth, and so if I'm a fossil bone and I've been laid down in a riverbed and I'm being covered by sediments, if those sediments have radioactive components in them, they become incorporated into my structure. So that's something about fossil bone and fossil wood, and I'll show you this piece. So basically, those materials are filling the pore spaces. This is super shiny. You can sort of, the glare. Let me see if I can find a better one. So you can see the structure maintained, and that's because those are pore spaces that get filled in. So if that material is radioactive material, you can see a little bit more in this wood, then you just became radioactive. And there's volcanic ash that's covering a lot of these things. And there's things that are weathering out of rocks. And there's a certain level of radioactivity around us all the time. It's just a matter of whether or not those levels are dangerous. And if they're concentrated in certain ways, then they can become harmful to human health.
Okay. Thank you for that. Maybe I'll just ask you one more for now, since you've promised to come back. Let me find it again. Sorry, one second. Oh, so from Lester, are the majority of the fossils found, are they found conveniently, like on top of the ground or in beaches, or are they found by actively digging for them?
Both. Both. There's a lot of active digging. So as a geologist in school, you learn geologic mapping. You learn, okay, what do we see exposed at the surface? How are these beds, these layers, how are they moving or dipping, if you will? And you start to look at topographic maps and say, like, okay, well, there should be an exposure over here, or you know, underneath this cliff face, there should, at the bottom, we should expect to see these layers. And so people go out and they dig and they look. But often it's especially in California, lots of construction projects reveal all this stuff, because scientists typically don't have the abundant resources that industry does to excavate for a road tunnel or to build a new dam. So the Calaveras Dam project has revealed all of these fossil marine mammals, tons and tons of whales coming out of that. So if you're really interested in that, check out the Calaveras Dam project and some of the work that's happening over at the UCMP, which is the UC Museum of Paleontology at UC Berkeley. So yeah, I guess the answer is both. Sometimes you trip over them, but often it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. And for the number of people who asked whether this video would be available to view later, yes, it'll stay right on this platform as soon as it's no longer live, so you can share from there. Chrissy, I'm so excited that you have agreed to come back.
I want to talk about microfossils, and
so
we'll do
tomorrow
too.
Or not tomorrow? Okay.
Soon.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. And you did a great teaser for our geology curator, Dr. Peter Ruperin's appearance. So please keep an eye on the Breakfast Club website. I'll drop a link in the comments to see when we schedule that. It'll be pretty soon, hopefully. And yeah, I think we can.
And I'll follow back up with some links. I'll follow up with some links to some of those papers for people who are interested.
Okay. Thank you so much. People love this. And I so appreciate you taking time and coming in for this today. We're still actually closed as a museum, of course. So this was no small feat that we managed to pull this off. But Chrissy, thank you again.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks so much for spending some time with me today, everyone, and be well.
Thanks, viewers. Take care.
Take care.